Welcome to Secrets from the Scene, a show for local musicians who want to improve their music, grow their audience, and learn about Minnesota's music scene. If you're interested in talking about all things music related and meeting interesting people from our local community, you're in the right place. Welcome to Secrets from the Scene. My name is Stephen Helvig, and I'm your host. Today's episode is going to be a good one. I've got Zach Zurn from Carpet Booth Studios down in Rochester, Minnesota as a guest today. We're going to talk about myths and misunderstandings in the recording process specifically. Everything from going into a studio to how you think about it, preparing for it. It'll be fun. We're going to go dive into a lot of the conversations that we both have had with clients over the years of maybe reframing how to approach the process in the best way. If this is your first time checking out the podcast, first of all, thank you. Thanks for tuning in and giving me some of your time. This is a podcast for local musicians, people that are in the beginning stages of their journey and are looking for advice from people that are maybe just one or two steps ahead of you. So if that's you, great. Hang around and check out some of the past episodes. We cover everything from, navigating the recording process like today's episode to things like royalties, the sync industry, community, marketing and promotion, all kinds of stuff that is integral to being an independent musician or engineer, producer, or anybody else that's in the music scene today. Before we get started, I'm going to read Zach's bio and then we'll dive into the topic. Zach Zurn is a songwriter, producer, and audio engineer based in Rochester, Minnesota. He has a love for honest songwriting and clever lyricism, seeks to create thoughtful and inspiring music, and values working with artists from all genres and backgrounds. With achievements like gold and platinum records, award nominations, and a genuine desire to help independent and regional artists find their own successes, Zach finds deep fulfillment in his work. He also plays in the band Author and owns and produces at Carpet Booth Studios in Rochester, Minnesota. Please welcome Zach Zurn.
Thanks for having me.
Am I saying that right? Zurn?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, that's it.
We got to meet earlier this summer. You hosted a really cool event down at your studio. What was the name of the event?
Yeah, what do we call it?
Some kind of meetup.
Yeah, open house and musicians market.
Musicians market, yes.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Thanks for coming down.
Happy to be there. I went down with Max and Joey, the other two guys that help with the podcast, and we had a booth along with a lot of other vendors, music vendors, and it was just cool to see the community down there that you have.
Yeah.
Very cool to see your studio.
Thanks, dude.
That's such a dope place.
Thank you.
Let's start with that. Talk about your studio a little bit, how that came to be, and the story behind that.
Yeah. Carpet Booth is in Rochester in an old church. And yeah, to make a long story short, we moved to Rochester, my wife and I, in 2016 for her job. I was needing a space to mix in, to songwrite in, to do some production of my own in. It wasn't really a public space for anybody else. And so I found a spot in downtown Rochester, this dingy little spot that somebody rented to me for super cheap. But it was actually cool. Other than the stains on the carpet and the ugly green walls and stuff, it was cool. It had like a kind of long control room with a room off of it that had a little window in it, kind of ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I brought over a couple buddies just for fun one day. We started tracking in there. Some dudes I grew up with played in like a little punk band called Local Sports. And they needed to track some songs they were working on. So I decided to do a little EP with them there instead of like traveling up to the cities and renting out a room. Made it work. And to make a long story short, word had kind of spread around kind of the greater Rochester area that there was like a spot, because Rochester's always kind of, struggled to have some decent spots. I'm not bashing anybody that has had spots. So there's been some really, really cool studios there in the past for sure. And some really, really talented engineers and producers there. But for a while at that time, there had been a hole to fill, I guess. To make a long story short, man, there was like a demand, and I started to kind of just get random phone calls as word kind of spread. And people were like, hey, we need a spot to come record. We hear you're talented. Can we come record? And I was like, I'm not really looking to do this. I already was very busy with working with like other clients, mixing for other clients, writing with other clients, producing for other clients. I had been kind of coming up here a lot, co-engineering, co-producing with other people, kind of working with other people. I already kind of had a career started. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was just living in Rochester and just needed my own space to kind of produce, mix, and write. But I figured I'd give it a go because if I had to travel less, that was huge. That kind of snowballed like crazy. And after about a year and a half, 2 years of being there, kind of outgrew my space pretty quickly and started looking for a different spot because I was loving not having to drive more than 10 minutes, actually 5 minutes at the time, to get to my studio. And that was killer. And so the stars aligned with finding this, former church building. It's like 6,400 square feet. It's just this huge building.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never looking for anything that grandiose. But like a conversation we had off mic a little bit before, we find that a lot of people in our position in our career kind of just got to be at the right place at the right time a little bit to kind of get this career started. There was this person that really believed in me as a producer, believed as me as kind of a business person, and decided to help me out in a kind of private financing sort of way. It's not free money or anything, but, made it possible for me to take a real swing at this thing and go ahead and move into this church and renovate it and build it out into our Studio A and our Studio B, which is now Carpet Booth. And that was in 2018.
Okay.
There was an intermediary space that we occupied in the downstairs of the church for a while before we could build out our Studio A. And we made some really cool records down there. And then in 2019, we finished renovating upstairs and made it into our Studio A, man. And we just love it. We worked with an incredible studio designer named Bruce Kaiser, who's done some really cool builds up here in the cities and around kind of the upper Midwest. And he helped kind of get what was in my brain into reality as far as what I wanted my workflow to be. And I kind of got my 2 ISOs on the west and the east side of my control room and my big live room right out front on the windows in the control room. And it's everything I kind of wanted. And I didn't think I would have it. I feel very blessed and it feels like a luxury to have to work in. And it's such a joy to have the artists I get to work with and have my staff and interns and other folks like yourself at those events come just like be able to share the space with us, It's a joy.
Yeah. I mean, it's a super impressive space, very unique. I've heard of more churches getting converted to studios. Like that's a thing now because obviously having such, high ceilings and large spaces is ideal. And there tends to be, especially in rural communities, there can be access to getting a church.
Yeah.
So that's cool, but I think how you built it out and how you use the space is just really clever and well done. It's super flexible. There's a ton of gear. So, the work you've done is amazing too. Great clients. We can get to that too. Maybe that's the next thing to go to is talk about some of these gold and platinum records. But yeah, if you're unfamiliar, for anybody watching and you're curious, and particularly if you're in the Rochester area, but even if you're not, check it out. I'll have the link in the show notes, but
Thanks,
it's worth looking at this space. It's super cool.
Thank you, dude.
So yeah, I mean, gold and platinum records. That's nothing to sneeze at. Name drop a little bit. Let people know who you're working with.
Yeah, I have some gold and platinum records for working with an artist named Young Gravy. So he's this rapper that's from Minnesota originally. And he's gone on to have some great industry success. So I met him back in 2017 and have been able to work with him in several capacities, writing, performing instruments on the records, singing, doing background vocals, singing some kind of feature vocal stuff, mixing, mastering, production, kind of everything within TV track creation. Yeah, it's super fun. I've just grown really close with them, really close with this team. It's not something I ever thought I'd be doing. I actually don't work on that many rap and hip hop records. I grew up playing in like rock bands and stuff, and I do a ton of, I pride myself in being a multi-genre producer, and I refuse to ever get siloed into one genre. I love that I get to work on, a Young Gravy record one day, and then right now I'm working on like an LP with a Minneapolis band called Gully Boys, and then I get to work on a folk record the next day, and then get to mix some really cool symphonic orchestra stuff the next day. So I love the multi-genre stuff I get to do, and I refuse to ever not do that. But I didn't think that my first, for lack of better language, industry success, whatever that means, that's so subjective, would be on some fun, really cool rap stuff. But Matt, who's Young Gravy, has just grown to be a close friend, and I love working on that stuff.
Yeah.
It's so fun to work on tunes and with an artist and with a team where we just feels like we don't have any boundaries, You're not trying to be cool, limitless. I don't know how to describe it.
Sure.
We're just doing whatever we want to do. And that's a wild feeling.
Was it that way at the start? I guess I don't know his origin story of at what point he blew up or any, really anything outside of that. He has these big hits. But like when you met him, was he still like fully independent, or was he trending and having some success at that
great
moment?
question. He was the quintessential SoundCloud rapper.
Okay.
So he posted a few songs on SoundCloud, and one called Mr. Clean just erupted. And that was right after I met him. So Mr. Clean, went viral, and that got him a record label with Republic Records under the UMG, under Universal umbrella. And so when I first met him, he had just signed pretty recently to Republic. And so that was my first major label project, which was fun and overwhelming also I think at that point I had been working full time in production and engineering for just 3 years. So that was cool to like cut my teeth, I'd say fairly quickly, and just getting thrown into major label contract talks. And I wasn't represented at the time by a manager or anything like that, which I am now. But so it's nice to have some help with that these days. But I'm super grateful for how that happened, because I had to just represent myself and learn about contracts and meet with major label lawyers and all these sort of things, to handle all those conversations. And I learned so much, and therefore that makes me a better mentor for my interns, and I can help artists in conversations with the studios navigate those conversations when they're having that, if they're having to do that with their labels. And anyways, very thankful for how that all happened. But no, it's been that way from the beginning, man. Limitless. Matt just does whatever he wants. His team does whatever we want alongside him. And people love Gravy for Gravy. He's just fully himself. And I just don't know if I'll ever work on another project or with an artist like that is so just like fully himself. And anyways, I love it.
I love hearing that. Yeah. And what a great place to start when you're fully yourself. And that works. Then now you're in a place where you just get to continue doing the thing that you were hoping to do in the first place.
Yeah, it's authentically him. He doesn't have to keep up some sort of facade,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's great. He's just truly a Minnesota boy through and through. Every time I get to talk about him on interviews, on podcasts, I really enjoy doing it. I mean, he's a talked about character because he's some semblance of a celebrity in whatever way. But I like talking about him because when somebody has some sort of celebrity status, there's a lot of shit talking about them. It just comes with the territory.
I suppose, yeah.
Not because he has any sort of a scandal or anything, but that dude's just a Minnesota boy through and through. We just get nerdy in the studio about geography and reminiscing about growing up in Minnesota. He does a great job on including all of his day one friends from being a kid. He's never left anybody behind and generous. So anyways,
that's great.
Love the guy for his heart. And you see a lot of people change as they like climb the industry ladder, whatever the hell that means. And he hasn't. So anyways, lots of props to Matt.
Speaking of growing up in Minnesota, where did you grow up?
I moved to Rochester from Texas. I was born in Louisiana, but then lived in the South until 7th or 8th grade.
Okay.
Yep. And then moved to Rochester. And then went to college, toured with the band for a while, but then moved back to Rochester in 2016.
What brought you to Rochester?
One of my mom's jobs.
Okay.
Yep. Just moving around for parents' jobs.
Where did you go to school?
Century High School in Rochester. And then I went to Winona State University and got a music degree there.
Nice.
Yeah, which I actually loved it.
Winona's a cool town.
I lived there for 5 years, man. I loved it. I wish in some way we could have stayed there just for the natural beauty, especially at the time I was living there. And it still exists in some degree. I don't even want to compare, but like there's such a thriving art scene there. Not just in music, but in theater, in the fine arts and performing arts in general. It's such a unique little town, You can see, it was so fun to learn about that town just when I was living there and from my wife's parents, because they lived there for a long time. It was such like a hippies town in the 70s, and you can still feel the like aftermath of that. It's just a fun, like free-spirited, like slower paced living town on the river. It's so beautiful. If I could kind of have like that mid-sized city feeling of Rochester with like the natural beauty and the slower pace of Winona, it'd be gravy, pardon the pun.
Yeah. So you got a music degree. Did you go into that thinking, I want to start a studio? Was that somewhat in the back of your mind? Because I know you were doing songwriting and production, but did you always think of a studio as a piece of that?
That's a great question. And honestly, a bit of my memory is a little bit blurred. People that know me really well know that I have like one of the worst memories in the world. It's kind of sad, but I was a little misdirected there for a while, just kind of figuring myself out. But it's a kind of a yes and no answer. making records has been my first love, like career-wise and just passion-wise. And that's been since like late elementary school. I went to like a fine arts magnet school as a kid in elementary school in Texas where I grew up. They're not private schools, they're public schools, but a lot of schools had emphases at them. So you could like try out to go to the fine arts school or the science school or whatever, right? And so I went to this dope elementary school. We'd have like 2 musicals a year, 2 plays a year, extracurricular activities. We'd have little master classes of, marching snare. College kids would come in and like teach us how to do marching snare patterns after class, 1 week. And the next week they'd teach us how to do cassette tape recording. And that's kind of where I found out that I was like, oh shit, like I like manipulating audio and writing songs. So anyways, what was your question?
What your intentions were with music, if the studio was a part of it always.
So when it came to like high school and college time, I actually was studying music education for a little bit to possibly become like a choir director. Because for a while I was like, I should have like a proper, bachelor's degree just in case this thing doesn't work out. I still had it set in my mind. I'd love to be at least a songwriter. That was like my first love, right? And I was always the kid that had the recording set up at home in the punk bands, in the rock bands, in the shitty garage bands that I was playing in, that the other bands would come over and kind of record with, or I'd record demos for my own bands and stuff. And so that was always a goal of mine, that like I would play in a band and we'd get signed, right? And that I would write songs for other people and that I would produce, just that kind of general artistry career, right? But then, reality hits and you're in college and you're like, I should get some sort of degree just in case this doesn't work out. But by the time college is kind of ending, I'm like, by the time like college is halfway through, I'm kind of like, screw this. No, I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket. Like I'm really good at what I do, not in a super cocky way, but just in a confident way. I was like, I'm really good at this. Let's just full send. I had really supportive parents, supportive in the way that they were just like, we want you to be happy. And they both chased careers that they were super happy with and never were rich, but were really happy in the careers that they did. And I was okay with living that life too, of maybe I won't make a bunch of money, but I'll be happy waking up every day going to work. And so, just put all my eggs in that basket. Super glad I did. Kind of believed in myself and bet on myself in that way. But that was probably around the time. And then right after school, kind of just decided to dive right in, take a risk on myself. And that was 2014. Kind of had some odd jobs as well, to make it work.
Yep.
Of course. Pretty soon after school was able to just dive full time into it, which was great.
And so for those early years, you were doing what you could, I'm sure, out of home, but then renting rooms up in the Twin Cities.
Yeah, doing a lot out of home. Yep, rented some rooms here, working and learning with and from other people up here as well. Some other like talented producers and engineers. Just kind of gleaning wisdom. I'd say my kind of education of like how I learned how to produce and write and engineer is like a kind of perfect amalgamation of self-taught, kind of book-taught. I even did like a semester of Berkeley online or whatever, just to like try to get some production knowledge from the horse's mouth. And to be fair, like it wasn't even a ton of new information, but I was grateful I did it so that I could kind of just like validate some of the practices I was doing, like in the box and Pro Tools and stuff. And then, music degree at Winona State. My emphasis was voice. That was by far more than like technical knowledge as far as like preamps and gear and outboard gear and mic setups and stuff. My music degree at Winona State, for what it taught me theory and ear training wise, is by far the most important tool for me. Because yes, I'm an engineer, but like we talked off mic briefly, I approach all my engineering from a songwriting and production standpoint. Engineering is a means to an end for me, for sure. I think by definition it probably is, but I think an audio engineer first who has an extremely technical mind and doesn't approach it from like a songwriter's perspective first might get a little offended by that, which is fair. But similar to how Pro Tools is a means to an end to me, it's just a capture device for me, I get frustrated by that sometimes where it's like, stop getting in my way when it's bugging out because I have the song in my head. That's all that matters to me. I get so obsessive about a song and a melody and a story. And when the engineering gets in the way or a signal flow or a piece of gear or Pro Tools or whatever gets in the way, I'm not throwing tantrums, but it frustrates me. That chaos can just be so crippling sometimes because I'm so song first, So
yeah.
Anyways,
That's funny. That
Yeah, go ahead.
My background is so similar because
Okay.
music degree at Hamlin, vocal performance.
Really?
Yeah.
Great.
And I have the same feeling that like of all the skills that you acquire to be able to do the job, like the voice training and the ear training, the music theory, like that is what really defines my process more than any of the other stuff.
Absolutely.
I think ear training is just so critical and
Huge.
probably not talked about quite enough in the engineer world, because I look at gear the same way. Like I actually want as few pieces of gear as possible. I just want them to work and I never want to touch them again. I don't want to know anything about them. I want it to work. I, like this thing is good at doing this. Great. Moving on to the next. Like,
sure.
Because I'm more interested in the performances and the decisions that we're making than I am in where that knob is set to.
Sure.
Because I think the choices we make on the songwriting and on the production of how the thing is going to be played and expressed makes so much more of a difference than where I set this knob to.
Sure.
I have to know enough about that.
Right.
I have to have a certain level of competency. But I think that there's a lot of, fooling yourself too, of like, ooh, if I turn it just a little bit further, it's better. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, focus on the song. Like, that's really what matters to me.
Yeah, no doubt.
We'll get into that probably maybe more with the rest of the episode, but.
No, it's very intriguing. This is a conversation I have with my interns and my assistant engineering staff all the time, because nobody else on my current staff that live in town that work for me has ear training, abilities or history. So they can kind of like get down on themselves about it when they see me utilizing it in a session and see how helpful and efficient it can be. But it's nowhere near a prerequisite to be an audio engineer. Absolutely not. Especially if you're just trying to be an audio engineer, right? And you're not looking to produce records or be part of the songwriting process or the pre-production process or something. Do I still think it would be extremely helpful? Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about if you're tuning a snare drum for something, we're talking about overtones and harmonics here, and we're talking about a piano being a little out of tune, right? You don't have to be born with Charlie Puth perfect pitch or something here, but if you can have relative pitch and at least have a tonal center and then be able to understand what's happening off that tonal center, my God, your engineering chops and the abilities you have just, quadrupled, if not more, on what you're able to do, right? So it's not a prerequisite, but yeah, it has helped me so much. And some of this might be superficial, but most of it's not, is it wows clients. I mean, it is crazy if a client's trying to figure out what to play and I know what they're trying to play and I just tell them, I just am able to save them 5 minutes of figuring out and tell them what note to play. It saves their money, it saves their time, it saves their sanity. And so, yeah, I love that. It is the greatest gift. And every time I see those old professors of mine, I'll either shake their hand hard or give them a hug, because before I had the technical knowledge, I've always been able to, I wasn't born with perfect pitch, but, I had some sort of innate ability to, understand relatively what was going on pitch-wise, But for me to be able to put language to it was the greatest gift I've ever been. But anyone who understands this, it's also a curse. You're stuck the rest of your life analyzing everything you ever hear for the rest of your life.
True.
It's just outside of the studio. You're out in grocery stores and at other shows, and you're just like 1, 4, 5, 6, flat 7 you're just out here cursed for the rest of your life. But anyways, that's a little too Jacob Collier on this podcast. But it's a very helpful tool that I do think if people have the ability to teach themselves or go to classes or whatever it is, whether they're just a writer or a producer or an engineer, it's never going to hurt. It's only going to help.
I agree. I fully agree. And actually, let's kind of roll this off as maybe point number 1 in today's episode of Misunderstandings of the recording process. The list that I had come up with before was mostly focused on misunderstandings that artists have going into it. But I think this is a good one that perhaps engineers have about the recording process. And while I agree that it is not a prerequisite, like you can be just an audio engineer, I think that's going to keep disappearing in the world that we're in.
Yeah,
like
that's very true.
That role is hard to find now and probably going to go extinct
Yeah,
to some extent.
we wear multiple hats.
Yeah, if you're an audio engineer, you're also probably producing.
Yeah, good call.
At least there's going to be a lot more of those than there will be of a true just audio engineer.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, you're likely in that category. If you want to work at a studio, you want to have your own studio, any of those things, you need all the skills.
Right.
And so if it's not something you have now, can you move forward? Of course, you can start making records, but it will only help you make better records, because what it allows you to do is help the client in more ways. As an audio engineer, you can make it sound good from a technical perspective, but really what people will probably notice more is, depending on what level you're working at, there's a lot of asterisks to this, but is if you helped them with the song and you helped them with the performance, and those kind of things can make a bigger difference. And ear training and theory allow you to do that quicker and easier. I have watched people figure it out without all of that and still make really cool things. So it's possible, but it'll help. It'll help. And just on that point, every single topic that we bring up, there's an asterisk next to it.
Totally.
Okay. All of them. I'm going to bring these up because I think that for the majority of cases, the point that we're trying to make resonates, but there's always an exception with everything. And the recording process, there's so many different ways to make a really great record. So this isn't about, right and wrong. This is about things that are common misunderstandings that can often yield bad results, and trying to avoid those. You might have a reason to disagree with any one of the things that we bring up today, and by all means, disagree, as long as you know what your reasons are. If you understand why you disagree, then please do. But if this is all new to you, these points are meant to be helpful for the majority of cases.
Yeah. And I'll even play devil's advocate against our points for a second, because I've been in sessions and praised the artists I'm working with that they don't know a lick of theory, because the way that they approach their instrument is so different than I ever would. They got their fingers all spidered up on their fingerboard, their fretboard, and that is nowhere near the approach I'm ever going to take. Or they're crisscrossing on the piano and doing these wild voicings. I know some great songwriters that have no idea what they're doing on the piano, and they're playing even just, let's say it's, just diamonds, whole notes of 4 chords. And when they play it, I can analyze it, but maybe it's a 1 to a flat 5, or like a minor 5 to a flat 6 to a flat 7. And, there's a lot of color in that progression.
Yeah.
And so that's why they like it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know that it's that weird cadence, weird progression, But to me, I see it and I hear it and I'm like, oh my God, that was brilliant. Why'd you use a minor 5 there? Like, that's so weird, no leading tone, whatever, I'm analyzing it. And they're like, I don't know, it just felt good.
Yeah.
And I love that, because they're going to find and trip over things that my brain's never going to do, because unfortunately, I am, or have a really hard time not thinking about the boundaries or the rules once in a while.
Sure.
It's hard for me. And I do it as a practice once in a while. I'll sit down at the piano and I'll just close my eyes and I'll just put my fingers wherever. And it's really uncomfortable, because I want to sit down in the key of G and have a top line melody, and I'll hear my, scale degree 6 go flat. So I know I can play a diminished 2, 7 or something,
Sure.
I just know that. But it's I got to try that more the other way, because Interpol's out here making killer records. Sorry if they know theory, I don't know, but I'm just naming some random band, and making these killer records, and they might not know all that good theory. My Bloody Valentine, there's a good example of just some weird stuff that's going on. So.
I think that trying to stay as open-minded and this like creative, free, just expression can yield really interesting results in your songwriting.
Yeah.
Both in chordal choices, but also just structure and texture choices and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think that
not. Right.
You're being creatively expressive because you don't have a pattern or any math to lean on. So you just have to do it.
You're forced. Yeah.
Yeah, you're forced to. I think by learning the pattern in math, the fear is, okay, yes, but now I'm going to do that. And there's truth to that, because especially for 4 years of schooling or whatever, that's what you're doing. And so you build up these habits. I think the trick is just to either take the theory even further, so you get into the really advanced jazz theory that's happening,
Right.
and that can still be a choice, or to just practice letting that go a little bit and allowing yourself to just make things that are outside, color outside of the lines on purpose. Okay.
Balance,
absolutely.
As with most things,
but let's call that kind of misunderstanding number one, is that I do think that it's not a prerequisite, but it is important for engineers to learn some theory. It will help. Let's take a minute to talk about our sponsor, Helvig Productions, which just so happens to be my studio. Are you a musician here in the Twin Cities, currently releasing music and ready to upgrade your sound? If you're tired of underwhelming recordings and want a polished, professional sound that gets people talking, we're here to help. We'll work with you to transform your next song into a production that feels impeccable, gets your friends singing along, and catches the attention of your soon-to-be new fans. And here's my guarantee. Give us 7 days to deliver a mix you love, or we'll keep working for free until you're 100% satisfied. If that sounds compelling, here's how it works. First, we'll start with a pre-production analysis where we focus on the core of everything, the songwriting and arrangement. We'll give you an honest, outside perspective to make sure your song is on track for the sound you want. And if it needs a few tweaks, we'll give you some tips and work with you to make improvements. If you want a deeper writing collaboration, we can bring in a specialized songwriter to assist. Either way, you keep full ownership of your music, no matter what. Once that's locked in, we'll jump into the professional recording and production process. This is where we capture the best performance of each part from start to finish. We'll handle everything from detailed recording to expert vocal production, editing, tuning, mixing, and mastering. Plus, all our best production assistants along the way. We've got top-notch gear, a great live room, and most importantly, over 15 years of experience helping artists get their best performances. This process has helped our clients build real fan bases and even land on Spotify playlists. We've got the results to back it up. Sharkoff built a fan base from scratch with over 99,000 YouTube subscribers and over 60 million views across platforms. Silver Warehouse got their very first single playlisted by Spotify, racking up over 3 million plays. Waltzing on Waves had a song from their debut album playlisted on Spotify, amassing 2 million plays. Ludwig landed sync deals with brands like Hyundai and shows like All American. And we've got over 80 5-star reviews on Google. So if that's all you need to hear and you're ready to chat, head to helvigproductions.com/let's-connect or click the link in our show notes. We'll have you fill out a quick questionnaire, and if we're not a match, we'll let you know up front. We only work with clients who are a strong fit for our strengths because we're not satisfied until you are. If this sounds good to you, click that link and let's get started. I'm excited to see what we can create together. All right, let's get into the other ones that I think are a little bit more artist focused. I would say another misunderstanding. And in some ways, this might cover and bleed into almost all of them, but it's the concept of time. One thing that'll happen a lot is somebody calls me up, wants to do their first recording. Maybe if they have a band, it might be, all right, I want to record this record in the next 2 days and I want to get it done and it's going to sound amazing. It's like, maybe, but probably not. This is one of those points where it's like, is that possible? Yes, of course, it is possible. But it's unlikely, especially if it's your first recording, that that's the best way to go about doing this. I think one of the big misunderstandings is how long a recording is going to take. A lot of people very much underestimate what is needed to do a professional job in the recording process, both when going into a studio and when doing it on your own.
Right.
It takes a long time.
Yeah, it does.
There's a lot of details that go into it. Somebody can often have this sort of simplistic thing of like, well, my song is 3 minutes long. It'll take this long to set up, and then we're done, right? No, there's a lot more that goes into it than that. I think a lot of people know this inherently, that, oh, well, it's going to take a little, there's some mixing, I know, we probably have to pick between takes and stuff. But even that, it can go so much deeper than that. So the first thing is understanding that you probably need more time than you think if it's your first recording. And if you've done some recordings, then you've probably learned this the hard way. And planning accordingly. And talking to whoever you're going to be doing this with about realistic time expectations so you know how to budget.
Artists do need more time than that. There's a lot of ways to mitigate that. There's dozens of ways. We've really wrestled with how to best communicate those ways. Is there a place on our website that we have like resources set out for them or something? What I tend to do is love to get on the phone with these people and talk about what their project is, what their hopes, dreams, and aspirations and goals are. I actually did this on the way to this podcast this morning with an artist. Then figure out from there what the most efficient use of their time and money is. Because if somebody's looking to record 10 songs in one day, my question is, why? That's usually what my question is.
Yes.
Which I think some artists are surprised that I would ask that, which is maybe fair. They may not feel like that's any of my business. I think it's one of the best questions to ask, though.
Absolutely. Because it gets at goals, right? Is this about getting songs recorded for the sake of just posterity and you just need demo versions of these? Or is this about trying to make something that is extremely well done? Those are two different goals.
And those are the almost verbatim, questions I would ask. Mm-hmm. Just for archival purposes, to be able to get local shows booked? Or is this to release like a proper collection of songs out, with goals of making a career?
What's your mindset? Is this to get as much content or music for the least amount of money? Okay, we're going to go fast. We're thinking about efficiency. Or are we thinking about making the best song we can?
Right. And there's no moral value, attached to either one of those options. It's neither good or bad, honestly. It's just different. So that's why I like to get on the phone with either one of those people. That's why I'm really happy with the sort of balance we have with my staff at Carpet Booth, because for quite a while now, I'm not, and this might sound like a diva thing. That's not what I mean, but I'm just not working, and I'm not interested in working with the bands that are, just doing it to get 10 songs done in a record, to just maybe book the local show or whatever it is for whatever reason. I know what makes me happy. I know what is going to help my career move forward. It's going to add to my portfolio and honestly just help my mental health and give me joy. That's the proper, blood, sweat, and tears, pre-pro to post-production sort of thing, focusing on the song and letting me in my full skill set of being a songwriter, producer, and engineer really impart onto the song and shine. And so depending on how that conversation goes with the artist, then I know that, am I going to be the best fit for this, depending on their budget, or is another one of my staff members going to be the best fit for that? So yeah, I think artists just need to ask themselves why, maybe before they reach out to a specific studio or producer or engineer. That would be a great tip I would offer. Another thing to really consider is, depending on, what their why is sure, your band has maybe written 15 songs. Do you need to record all 15? That blows people's minds sometimes when I suggest that to people. And I don't say that with any judgment, because I think for years I probably thought that very same thing. Mm-hmm. But I love suggesting that to people. It's honestly one of my favorite things, because it just kind of unlocks a new idea in some artists and bands' brains, where I say, do you feel like those 15 songs are gold? Some of your strongest songwriting, And they say, well, maybe 8 of them are. Okay, then let's just use that same money. You only had the amount of money to quickly track 15 songs. Let's take that same amount of money. Let's take a little longer tracking those 8 songs. And now you've opened up that remaining money to actually put into proper mixing, and mastering possibly, depending on what your budget is. And it feels like they can jump over the moon at that point. And the other 7, maybe they go on a future project. But to be honest, we know how songwriters are. By the time that 8-song record is finished, sometimes they're sick of the other 7 songs anyways. Or they never were supposed to see the light of day. Everybody approaches songwriting differently. This is not a, objective sort of thing, right? But that's what I see a lot.
Yes. I think that misconception does ultimately lead to this conversation of, hey, there are multiple ways to make a record. Let's talk about what your goals are. So you have to figure that out first. But it also bleeds into this next point, which is what the most efficient process is, or how you should approach something. So the misconception being, we should do this live because that's the only way to get the feel, or whatever, name any number of different things that people have seen their heroes do. So I need to do it that way. And because that must be the way to do it. Maybe, again, asterisks. Yeah, maybe, but probably not for a lot of times. Realize that when you see those stories, while they might be inspiring, There's a number of factors and situations that made that the right choice in the right time for that person, but you're not that person and you're not in that time, in that place. When you go about doing a recording project, you have to trust the people that you're working with and figuring out what their process is and listening to that. If you are working with a producer, for instance, listening to their feedback about what they think would be the most efficient process. Early on, there's been times I would make the mistake where I would, for the right reasons, I was just trying to make the client happy of like, this is how they want to do it. Let's let them lead a little bit. And I'm doing this, realizing that I'm actually doing a disservice by following their lead because I knew better that at the end of this thing, we were going to be saddled with more work and more billable hours than had I just sort of put my foot down and said, no, we have to do it in this order, with pre-production being forefront in this because it will save us time at the end versus, or no, we're going to use these session musicians that I know are good for this instead of your friend that plays guitar sort of okay. That's just going to take way too much time and it's not going to work and the results are going to be worse. So when it comes to efficiency, sometimes the longer path, or what might feel like the longer path because we're not recording at this session, we're just writing, we're just doing pre-production, that might be more efficient. That might come to get better results in a faster manner.
Yeah. I will die on that hill because I've lived it thousands of times, It's probably not true, but I feel like I can almost count it on both hands the amount of times that hasn't actually rung out to be true, where a pre-pro to production to tracking to post-production process in that order hasn't been the right and efficient process for a single or an EP or an LP, any sort of process and project. And I mean, there's a reason why records and EPs and albums have been made that way for so long. You know what I mean? And I concur. I have early in my career let the artist take the lead, and you understand why you do that. You don't want to be this my way or the highway sort of producer. Honestly, the fact that those kind of strong arm producers exist in this industry and are so brutal in the way that they communicate with artists makes me sick. I hate that exists in the way that they communicate. But the longer I've done this, I understand why some of the most successful producers take the reins so hard, because they know what works so damn well and they need to take the reins for that. But before we even start talking about this, what's the prerequisite for this to work is trust between the artist and the producer. Mm-hmm. So if any artist is going into a record making process, whether record, EP, LP, whatever, and doesn't trust this person that they are literally asking to guide them and lead them along, then all it's going to be is speculation and hesitancy throughout this entire process. When you're right, it doesn't feel productive sometimes to sit down at a control room and pick apart a bridge for 3.5 hours as part of a pre-pro process, or to tell them that it's not going to be best for their best friend, who's unfortunately very mediocre at the ukulele, to come in and track this solo because it's going to take them 4 hours to track the solo when they can pay $150 to the great ukulele player to come in and rip it in 45 minutes because they don't know any better.
Yeah,
but we do.
And the trust is integral. If you don't have that, then you should maybe do it on your own.
Do it on your own or find somebody else.
Yeah.
And I remember, I don't know how long, maybe 4-ish years ago, probably, I started to say this in probably every single pre-production meeting or just meetings where I would have with people that we were seriously thinking about working together. And I would say, I need you to feel good about me as a person and as somebody that you're going to be able to let go of some control with on this record. And these were not artists and bands that were like, I'm going to come in and record 15 songs in one day.
Yeah.
These were, the ones that were, I'm being asked to produce this record, even an indie or label, whatever, right? I said, you need to trust me. You need to think I'm a person of good character and all these things. And if you do not feel that way, then I will not be hurt. But you need to go find somebody that you feel that way about, because this can be a laborious process. And you do gotta, even when it doesn't feel right to you, trust me. It's not like I'm gonna make mistakes sometimes, of course, but you gotta have you got to have my back on some decisions I got to make. And most of the time, I'm not cocky, but most of the time, my batting average is pretty high on these things after all these years of doing it, I'm going to swing for some things, but I hit the ball most of the time. So if you got to trust me on these things.
Yeah. One of the most frustrating things to me is when I can tell, and this doesn't happen very often. It does not happen very often, but once in a while, somebody sneaks in through the cracks of like, I didn't screen this well enough in the first place. And I'm in a session where I can tell that the client doesn't believe that I have their best interests in mind,
tough.
of like my suggestions aren't for their benefit. That's one of the hardest things where I'm kind of immediately like, well, then we shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
It should just be over. I feel like this is a whole conversation for another podcast episode, but
I got us a little off track.
But it's an important one.
But it is super important. Yeah.
Before we kind of wrap up this, like the whole time expectations thing, because it bleeds into multiple points.
Great.
There's going to be some people going like, great. Yes, I would love to do pre-production and the whole thing. I just can't afford to.
Yep.
And that's fair. That's why they wanted to do 15 songs in a day or whatever. Know that we're pushing back because there are other options. The one that you alluded to was do fewer songs.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't need 15 mediocre songs.
Yeah.
7 really great ones, or even 1 really great song will be way more powerful and more beneficial to your career than 15 that nobody hears.
I will die on that hill.
Yeah. So that's your option number 1. But option number 2 is this plethora of hybrid combinations. Our access to home recording and the ability to do things remotely is unprecedented. You can get extremely good quality stuff with low cost gear, DI recording, guitars and bass. There's some stuff that you need a good room for, or you might prefer a good room for, but you can talk with a producer of like, okay, well, if this is my budget, that's one of the big things is know what your budget is if you can, and then come up with a plan. I know you do this. I've done this plenty of times where it's like, here are the things I think you should do at home because I think that you'll do a great job at them and you probably don't need to do them in this room that is going to charge more money than your living room. Then we can work on this together in a hybrid way and stay closer to your budget, but still get the results that matter to both of us.
And this is something we briefly talked about off mic. I would say honestly, I would probably put all my money on this. All of the clients that I work with very closely that I've produced in the last several years would say that the value of their money is not being paid for the carpet booth space or my gear or my instruments. Yes, I love my space. I think it's unique. My instruments, my gear, it's all part of these records in a very special way. And this is going to sound cocky, but I don't mean it in that way, it's my professional opinion. It's my taste. It's my preferences, right?
Mm-hmm.
That artist's best value for that money is the professional opinion and the flavor that producer, that writer, that engineer puts on the record, right? And so if you view it that way, I think it then puts into context and kind of justifies and validates your money in different ways and in a more intentional way, right?
Yeah. I agree, which leads me to my next point, which is I can just do this all at home. Maybe. Again, asterisk, yes, maybe you can. Particularly if you have an interest in being a producer. Both of us have worked out of our homes before very successfully. It's possible. So if that's you, if you see yourself also as a budding engineer, music producer, then yeah, maybe that is the right choice for you. Get some gear, start working on it at home. If you are not that, though, then I would say take a very honest look at how much time you have available to you to learn how to do this. And if you have the discipline to stick with it, because those two things can really derail a lot of people where they end up spending a bunch of money on a home setup and then 1 year later selling all that stuff because they realized I just don't have enough attention like to sit here and do the tedious editing and whatever else that's not fun that we do every day. The other thing though, which you were just saying, is that even if you have the skills, you have the ability, you have the discipline to do all of these things on your own, there's still such a value to having an outside opinion, to having a professional assist you in some areas where maybe you don't have that skill set yet. Particularly, the number one thing is mixing. Like that just takes a long time to like really get good at. you can learn how to track your guitars pretty quickly. That's real. And that isn't going to lose any quality, and you'll be fine. But mixing your track or getting it mastered does require a certain level of expertise that only comes with a lot of time and with a certain setup, like a know-how of the technical setup to make sure that your listening environment's accurate and all of this stuff. So staying open-minded, if you do have that thought, because it's not necessarily a misconception, it's just an opinion of like, I can do this all on my own. But staying open-minded to that, it might be beneficial, though, to still work with somebody else so that you can learn from them. Watching somebody do a record is an amazing education. It's awesome. If I came and watched you make a record, I would love that. Like, just that'd be super interesting to me, just to see like, what can I steal off of Zach? And I know that you would do the same thing no matter what studio you walk into. It'd be like, okay, how do they approach this? As an artist that's doing it at home, you have so much to gain if you get to be a client at a studio or a fly on the wall for somebody else's session or anything. Yeah. So take advantage of those opportunities because there's a lot to be learned.
Yes. Yes, 1000%. That's what really made me incredibly fall in love with the possibility of doing this as a career, was booking studio time in 7th grade in a band at the Terrarium.
Oh, yeah.
We shouldn't have been there. It was crazy. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was at IPR Studio A. That was the first studio we were in. I think 9th grade was the Terrarium. But anyways, I just remember, IPR Studio B, because I remember poking my head and looking into IPR, and POS was recording it in Studio A at the time. And just being a little kid from Minnesota, I was like, oh my God, and just losing my mind that we were, working with this engineer named Rob Osterlin, who for a long time worked, in the studios up here, and I think is still doing some stuff up and around here. I was just probably so annoying, but scooting my chair up and just obsessing over everything Rob was doing and asking questions. And that was college for me,
Yeah.
All the money, sure, we got a physical product out of it, but I wouldn't have cared if we did or not, Yeah. That was worth the money for me. Absolutely.
A similar misunderstanding that we can tie right into this is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, but I see this where, and I bet you've had this a little bit too, where clients call up and they're basically trying to find out like, how nice is your gear? Tell me about what kind of mics you got, like basically what they're operating off of is the nicer the studio, the higher end the gear is, that means the better my project is going to be. It's usually from older people because that was true at one point. There was definitely truth to that there was a barrier to entry of like consumer level things were generally just not capable of getting a high enough quality. And so you had to check around a little bit for a time, but that time has long been gone at this point. And the quality of gear can give you clues as to maybe how serious somebody is because they're very invested. Ultimately, what you pay for is the person you're working with and how well they know how to use what they've got. And we have seen now plenty of times that people can make a hit record with a bedroom setup. That's possible at this point. So you don't need to just look for the nicest studio you can possibly find. If you've got that budget, by all means do it. I'm sure as two studio owners, we're happy to have you come into our studios and do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not the reason why your record is going to be successful or not. It's going to be the decisions that are made in the studio, not the gear, not the space.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the motives for when people call and ask about those things are so all across the board. I tend to have varying answers for those people. When I have those folks calling, they're more thinking, is this a basement studio with an AT-2020 that's designed for just like hip hop solo vocals, or is this a proper studio that can record like my, oldies band? Is like, that's a very not fair generalized blanket statement to make, but that encompasses the majority of the phone calls I make. It does get the point across. And so I can sympathize to a certain extent because, it is tough. I mean, but I understand that like, this name studio and this name studio are both called recording studios because they should be, but the clients they have and the demographics they have and the types of records they make are so different. It's not a better or worse or good or bad at all. They're trying to vet which one's going to be better. So like I can sympathize with to a certain extent, but your point is completely fair that throw a 57 in the middle of the room. And if the performance is great and there's a brilliant songwriter behind it, then we got some magic going on.
Yeah. And I've had people say, well, I got this recorded. Well, like IPR would be a great thing of like, we did it at IPR. It's got the best gear in the world there. Yeah, but it was a student that recorded it and they were learning and they didn't know what they were doing yet. So it doesn't sound very good because it was a student project. That doesn't matter. You can be in a great studio. If the engineer doesn't know how to use all that stuff or coach in the right way and produce in the right way, you're still going to end up with a product that could have sounded like it came out of a basement with a
no doubt. So true. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Next, Misunderstanding. I think I only have one or two left.
I'm down. This is good.
Once this thing gets recorded with Zach Zurn, it's going to be a hit. That's all I needed to do was get a professional recording, and now it's done. The world takes care of it from here, right?
Perfect.
Yeah, nothing to worry about.
Nothing else. Yeah, what's next? You mean after mixing and mastering?
Yeah, just the idea that all I had to do was get it professionally recorded, and then it's over. Like, then the world will know my greatness.
Right.
No, unfortunately, even if you do all the things right and you work with a producer, you go through the right thing, you had budget for it, you took everybody's advice, you make this great song, it still doesn't mean that anybody's going to listen to it.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. You wish it was that easy.
Yeah.
I wish it was that easy for you and everyone out there trying to make it work. Yeah. I mean, I won't say any names, of course, but, you know, I was just involved in a label project that had a $30,000 recording budget, but the advertising and marketing budget was $130,000. So if you look at the, difference there, quite crazy. And that is not uncommon, So pretty wild. That's what labels are doing, Actually, if I think about the last few label projects I'm on and just run numbers, the advertising, marketing, and PR budgets combined have been greater than the actual recording budgets in all of those, the last label budgets I've done. So that's just a common thing these days. Obviously, on the indie side, you don't have the luxury of just throwing a lot of dollars at things. Ari Herstrand has, these amazing books out that you can read about some wonderful, ways to do DIY sort of marketing and things. This is where I get, if I'm being honest, pretty jaded because I have worked with and seen so many artists that you and I and everybody love and think that they should make it or they have all the potential in the world. And whether it's unlucky or they didn't do the right things to get themselves out there, or it wasn't the right time in the industry for that style.
And all those things can be true at the same time.
Exactly. Combination of all of them. They didn't have the industry success or whatever. That's why I love to focus on making the record and then doing my best to resource those folks that I work with other folks and other resources that give them the tools to market and do PR. I know that there's folks like Tinderbox here in like the cities that, do some like PR campaigns and stuff like that. But as far as like DIY kind of stuff goes, I've seen Minnesota and Minneapolis, St. Paul be a very, very strong and reputable home base and hub for people to create a music career in. And so what I have always implored and what I've seen work and would implore other folks to do right now is utilize your local scene, exhaust it. Okay, so use everything you can. Like if you're a cool math rock band, get in that Radio K circuit and play those, those kind of like live YouTube things they do and go get interviewed on there so you can get out to the U of M students and play the house show circuit and get involved at the garage, and just play as many shows as you can. And then, what was the thing I was going to say? Obviously, the Current is a massive thing we have. And we have, as many people know, on Sunday nights, we have this thing called the Local Show, which they are very accepting of new artists and they accept a lot of new submissions, so that can be a great way to kind of get your name out and word out there. There are so many bands that I can think of right at the top of my head that have made really thriving music careers that have then gone out of Minneapolis that have started this here and used this as an incredible hub. So if you're an artist or a band that is starting right here in Minneapolis, I think maybe what I'm speaking into is seeing in the past, especially kind of the generation of artists that I kind of grew up with, and I still see it, shoot for the stars really quickly with leaving their local scene behind too fast and not using this as a foundation. And sure, you could maybe go out and find success other places, but then there's no like home base to come back to, no home court advantage, for lack of better language, you know? And so you got to utilize those sort of things to have a launching off pad. This is not, new or revolutionary ideas or anything, but honestly, I'm a bit old school in the way that the internet sort of stuff is a great way to do it with TikTok and all those sort of things, but it's so saturated. I don't know much about that. I let the experts in that stuff handle that. I'm a bit of an old head where you play your shows in your local scene, you become a big name in that local scene so that you sell out the biggest rooms in your local scene and people start to see you. And I'll just say that as a quick anecdote is when I got my manager, the reason he found out about me, he lives in LA and he runs in fancy circles, whatever. The reason he found out about me was partially from my major label credits, but also because he's barely been to Minnesota, but he has been watching the Minnesota and Minneapolis music scene from LA for like 5 to 10 years and has been obsessed with the writers, the producers, the bands, the artists that are like here, and just thinks it's one of the most underrated and kind of unseen markets in the US right now. That was really cool to learn about from somebody who has a huge pulse on the industry. So people see it, people see what we have going on here, and it can serve as a great launching pad out to other and bigger opportunities.
Yeah, I agree with all of it. 100%. All right, the last point I wanted to make, and it feels maybe slightly out of order, but I think it's an important one to bring up about the recording process. The concept of when to finish your song. So the misunderstanding is, I'll just finish it in the studio versus I've got my song ready to go. Now it's time to go to the studio. Now, the misunderstanding would simply, because there is a time and place, both of us do writing sessions. So that would be a time to finish it in the studio if that's the case. But I would say for the majority of people going into studios, they're probably not doing a writing session. So being in the studio is not the time to finish your song. You should have workshopped it at that point and done as much pre-production on your own if that's not one of the stages going into the studio. Because once you're in the studio, especially if you're trying to move quickly, it's too late. However, on the flip side of this, there's also, my songs are perfect. All we have to do is record them now. That's also difficult. There's a sweet spot in between. I think the ideal place to be is, I have a song and I've worked on it and I feel really good about it. And now I'm ready to record it. And if nothing changed, I would be happy with it. But I'm open to hearing your ideas.
I agree that that's ideal. It's unfortunately not what I experience all the time from artists. That's why I think in those initial phone calls, emails, conversations I have with folks, that's another really early conversation I have is, what role do you want me or my staff to play? Like we said earlier, we wear so many hats in this current industry we work in. Are you wanting, professional opinion and suggestion from a producer role? Do you want us to, give you suggestions on how to improve your melody top line and your arrangement, etc.? Or are you completely fine with how the song exists and you're just wanting a technical audio engineer? You kind of have to educate on the differences there sometimes, which, is good. I love doing that. Although it can be tough to explain the differences sometimes. It's like trying to explain email to somebody that's like never understood what email is, which I had to do one time to a neighbor who had gotten out of prison one time. It was wild. It was a crazy human experience.
Explaining email.
I mean, they had heard about it, but they didn't fully understand it. So it was such a wild thing to try to explain. Anyways, neither here nor there. One of the biggest challenges ever. Yeah, so we asked that question, and that gives us a lot of clarity so that there's no confusion going into the session. But yes, in an ideal utopian existence, everybody would be open to, some suggestions here, because we do feel strongly, my staff and I, about us, knowing how a song can improve. So yeah, I would implore and suggest any artist to have a malleable mindset to believing that our staff at my studio and other competent producers and engineers that you have a trusting relationship with are not going to do anything that's going to cause harm to your song. It's only going to improve the strength. At the same time, I hold the belief, therefore the staff that I've trained hold the same belief that at the end of the day, it's your artist name on the front cover of that LP or on the cover on Spotify or whatever. So the buck stops with you. It's always a collaborative conversation, and that's how I would hope most producers would operate. It's not how every single one operates, I know, but so it's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
And sometimes, especially with records that I am producing where it's like a label project and the label came to me and the artist didn't come to me, or if it's like just an artist that I have an extremely close relationship with, that suggestion that I'm making is a very strong suggestion. And I don't think it ever becomes contentious, but when you have really good relational currency with someone, it's never an argument or a contentious, but it can get heated sometimes, because sometimes once in a while, I just feel very strongly about an idea. And sometimes they'll, shoot it down right away, which is not a great way to collaborate. You know what I mean? You'd hope that, and that's just figuring out how to collaborate with folks. But once in a while that happens, and you just have to figure out that relationship.
Yep.
That's a tough thing to figure out with new working relationships in the studio sometimes. You walk away from it and you come back to that idea once in a while, and you win some and you lose some. You know what I mean? But there's been some times where it's gotten a little, in the studio when I feel super strongly about a suggestion where it's like, I know you're saying no and I hear you, but this is how strongly I believe in it, that it's going to be detrimental to this section, and I'm only saying this for the benefit of your song, and you can still say no, but I'll be honest, it's going to kill me. And we've got to live with that tension. But that's what I love about the record making process, collaboration.
Yeah. I want to say two things come to mind on that point.
Yeah.
So one thing is that people often, their barometer for is this good or not is how does it make me feel?
No doubt.
Okay, so this song makes me feel good. I like it, therefore it is good. I'm going to record said song, okay? And of course that's important. Artists should feel good about their work and should defend the things that they believe are good, right? But at the same time, feelings can get you a little bit into trouble. And because things can feel good because they're familiar, things can feel good because there's a sentimental attachment to them. Basically, what I'm getting at is sometimes it's hard to accept a new idea,
right?
Because it won't immediately feel good because it is no longer sentimental to, but that was my original idea. And it's not what I'm used to. It breaks both those things. So of course it's not going to immediately feel good. And so now your whole barometer for why this is working goes out the window. So what do you do in those cases? This goes back to the trust conversation. And it goes both ways. The artist has to have trust for the producer, and the producer has to have trust for the artist. So there's been scenarios where, just like you, I've had that scenario of like, oh, I feel strongly about this, and I'm pretty sure that this is a better thing for the song. Or it was just an idea that I just love. I think it's cool. Like theirs is fine. I just think this is better. Not that this is going to be bad if we leave it.
Right.
And artist has said, no, I like this weird moment, that whatever, for whatever reason. And in those scenarios, I have to make a choice of how hard I want to push. And usually the thing that I'll come up with, my gut check is, how good is this artist? How much do I like their music already? How much do I trust, like, they've made some really cool stuff. They might be right about this,
Totally, dude.
And it really just comes down to that versus this is this person's first song or second song, and I'm helping them figure out like where the chorus is at. Then it's like, I'm going to push harder because I'm trying to do them a favor, essentially. Versus, no, I can see why they're good. They know what they're doing. Then I'll let those go earlier and say, cool. All right. Believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
I've said my
dude.
piece.
I love that perspective. It's one of my favorite things and some of my favorite memories, honestly, in records is when, and you said like the feelings and sentimental thing. because I agree, but it's not inherently bad, obviously, to have those feelings attached to songs. It's beautiful sometimes, right? And I love that when I've pitched an idea for a change in a song and it's objectively better, like more clever or more consonant in the song, whatever it is, right? But the artist describes to me when they wrote that, like where they were emotionally or physically, you know? And then they describe that to you and you're like, oh my God, okay, yeah, screw my idea then, you know? Because I'll forever have that story linked to that moment. And that, you know, outweighs my clever little moment or what, you know. So what did we say early in the podcast? Balance. As with everything in life, it's all about sync and balance. You know what I mean? And so, but honestly, I love getting it thrown back in my face like that because I have trust. And so it's not this, you know, I said win some or lose some earlier, you know, I'll redact that because that almost sounds like it's competition. You know, I didn't mean it in that way, but it could be interpreted that way. I don't mean that in any semblance of the word because it's just, we're on the same team. It's amazing. You know, I'm going through this LP with Gully Boys right now, and every session is bliss, even through those tension moments of like, are you sure this is the right call? You know, and there's 5 of us in the room and all 5 of us have a different opinion about something and we're just wrestling. But, you know, even if it's not your idea that wins out with quotations around wins, we just feel good about the decisions we're making. I don't know. There's some harmony in that. That's an almost spiritual feeling. I love it.
Because there's a beautiful thing about leaving space to have a new sentimental moment. That, okay, this little moment or this idea is lost, but trusting that in a few months or maybe next year sometime when that record comes on, you're going to be like, now I get it. Oh, that works so well. And I don't miss my old idea at all. But you have to have trust because that takes time for that to happen. And both. I've had things where artists have said no to my idea and they've stuck with their original vision. And then I was like, all right, well, you're lost, you know, like, you know, just privately to myself of like, I tried. Right. But then, you know, later on, the record is on. I've had enough time to forget about it, to not care about it. And I hear it and I'm like, you know what? Actually, that really works.
No doubt.
I was just wrong about that. I didn't hear it the way they were hearing about it. And just recognizing that we don't know everything. We're just doing our best. Both parties have to be vulnerable and open to like seeing the logic of the argument and, yeah, that might work. And then trusting and growing with it. That's all we have at the end of the day.
I love it, man. It's a joy. Yeah. It's great perspective.
Well, this has already been a pretty long conversation, so I think we should wrap it up. I know we could keep going on and on and on about the recording process because it's such a beautiful thing and it's amazing and challenging and fulfilling, but also tricky and hard to understand, like in all of this gray area, how you should navigate it. The best thing is just make sure you communicate with people, talk with the people you're working with and get on the same page, make sure that there's trust there. And a lot of these issues will get sorted out with just good dialogue.
Completely agree.
Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap this thing up?
Nope. All good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here and for making time. I have one last question for you because I ask every guest if you'd like to share a secret to the scene, something that you've learned over your time. I always phrase it as something that you might have wanted to know earlier on or something that, you know, your younger self would have been really happy to have heard if you had the chance.
Yeah, in an industry where a lot of this superficiality exists, don't worry about appearing cool to other people. I think I and just a lot of people, you know, did that for years. You know, you go into green rooms and you try to be, you know, cool and kind of keep up with with whatever's going on. It's too exhausting. And if you get to the top in that, then you got to keep up appearances and whatever, you know, you did to get there. Just be yourself. People are going to love you for who you are. You know, it'll speak for itself. That's got to be a pretty freeing existence, you know? So that'd be my secret.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. Just being yourself is the only sustainable approach.
No doubt.
To everything that you're going to be required to do in this industry. I love it. Well, if people want to reach out and get in contact with you, work with you, ask a question, where do you like to send people?
Oh, yeah. Zurn.com, ZZURN, or carpetbooth.com. or Instagram's the same, ZZURN or Carpet Booth on Instagram.
I'll throw those links in our show notes.
Sweet.
Don't be shy. Hit up Zach if you need anything. Thanks once again for doing this. I really appreciate it. For everybody that tuned in for this episode, thank you so much for listening. This is episode 60, I believe. So it's been such a journey. Thank you all for your support. Please, if you haven't already, leave a review, a like, a subscribe somewhere. It helps us a lot. I'll see you next time.